Let's be honest, have you ever spent hours, hours, rereading your notes, highlighting everything in sight, only to feel like you've retained basically nothing? Yeah, we've all been there. Today, we're going to dig into the real science of learning and uncover why our most common study habits might actually be the very things holding us back.
So think about it for a sec. How do you really prepare for a big test or an important presentation? If you're like most people, you're probably rereading, highlighting, just trying to passively absorb all that information. And you know what? It feels productive, doesn't it? But what if I told you that cozy feeling of comfort is actually a complete illusion?
So on one side of the ring, you've got passive reading. This is familiar territory for just about all of us, just kind of going over the material again and again. But on the other side, you've got active recall. This is the act of deliberately, and sometimes painfully, pulling information out of your brain. Think quizzing yourself. It's way harder, it takes more effort, and, as we're about to see, it's a whole lot more effective.
Okay, let's start by tackling the heavyweight champion of study methods, rereading. Why do we love it so much? Simple. It feels good. It feels like we're getting somewhere. But here's the thing. The actual science tells a totally different story.
In this quote right here, it gets to the absolute heart of the problem. When you reread something, the words, the concepts, they start to feel familiar. Your brain just goes, oh yeah, I've seen this before, I know this. But here's the catch. Recognizing something is not, and I mean not, the same as being able to recall it from scratch. That false sense of confidence, that's the rereading illusion.
So how can we be so sure about this? Well, let's look at this really cool study that put these two learning methods head-to-head. Researchers set up this simple but super powerful experiment to see what truly helps us update our memories when we're learning new stuff.
Here's the basic setup. On day 1, people in the study learned a bunch of word-picture pairs. Let's just call them A-B pairs. The next day, day 2, they had to update that memory with new pairs. So same word, but a brand new picture, making it an AC pair. Then on day 3, they got tested on how well they remembered that new AC information. Simple enough, right?
So they split the participants into two groups. The first group used the passive method we all know and love. On that second day, they just looked at the new word picture pairs over and over and over again. This is that classic restudy approach that so many of us fall back on. But the second group, they did something totally different. Instead of just seeing the new pair, they were shown the word A and then had to actively try to remember the new picture C. This is retrieval practice. It forced their brains to work, to struggle a bit, and to actually retrieve the information.
So the big question is, which group did better on the final test? The one that had a comfortable time restudying, or the one that had to struggle a little to recall the answer? Well, the results, they weren't even close.
The retrieval practice group, the ones who were basically testing themselves, remembered way more of the new information on that final test. That effort, that little bit of a struggle, it paid off in a huge way when it came to long-term memory.
And get this, it gets even better. Not only did they remember more, but they also made way fewer mistakes. Specifically, they were much less likely to get confused and accidentally recall the old information when they were supposed to remember the new stuff. So active recall didn't just build memory, it actually prevented confusion.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting. Why? Why does forcing yourself to recall information make such a massive difference? To get that answer, we need to take a peek inside our brains and see how they actually file and update all our memories. So let's talk about how this actually works under the hood. When you learn something new that's kind of similar to something you already know, your brain has a problem to solve. How does it store this new info without messing up or getting confused with the old stuff? Well, the key process is something called memory differentiation. It's basically the brain's super clever way of taking two similar memories and making them more distinct from each other, kind of sharpening the edges so you can pull up the right one when you need it. Here's a really easy way to think about it. Imagine your brain is a giant library. Now, passive rereading is like getting a new book that's really similar to an old one and just kind of shoving it on the shelf right next to it. Well, when you go back to find it later, it's super easy to get confused and grab the wrong book.
But active recall? Oh, that's completely different. That's like forcing the librarian to stop, to think, and to create a brand new, super detailed catalog entry. This entry doesn't just describe the new book, it clarifies exactly how it's different from the old one. It links them, but also separates them. This whole process makes both memories stronger and way easier to find. And we can actually see this happening in the brain. During active recall, a part of your brain called the lateral prefrontal cortex, or the LPFC for short, just lights up.
You can think of it as your brand's executive control center, and it's working overtime to manage the competition between the old and new memories, basically running that mental filing system.
So here's the absolute most important takeaway from all this. Retrieval practice is not about forgetting or erasing old information. In fact, the research shows the original memory stays just as strong. Instead, active recall is all about building a better, more organized mental index, strengthening the new memory and clarifying how it relates to the old.
Okay, so the science is clear, but how do we take this stuff out of the lab and actually use it in our own lives? It's way simpler than you might think. Let's look at a few super practical strategies.
Really, anything that forces you to pull information out of your head works. Using flashcards is a classic for a reason. Trying to teach a concept to a friend is incredibly powerful because you have to retrieve and organize everything to explain it clearly. Doing practice questions or even trying to sketch out a mind map without peeking at your notes, all fantastic ways to practice active recall.
Now, if you want a more structured way to do this, one of the absolute best systems ever designed around this very principle is the Cornell note-taking method. It is a simple but kind of brilliant way to turn passive note-taking into a really active learning process.
The whole system has 4 steps. First, you just record your notes like you normally would. No big deal. Second, you pull out the key ideas and write them as questions over in a side column. Then comes the magic part. You cover up your notes and try to recite the answers to your questions all from memory. And finally, you summarize the main points at the bottom of the page. That recite step, that is pure 100% active recall, built right into the way you take notes.
And look, this isn't just some new trend. The science behind this has been building for years and years. As some of the top researchers in the field wrote in the journal Science way back in 2008, retrieval isn't just a way to check your memory. It's a critical tool for learning itself.
So the next time you sit down to learn something new, I want you to resist that comfortable urge to just passively reread. Instead, challenge yourself. Close the book and ask, okay, what do I actually remember? Because that little bit of struggle to recall something, that's not a sign of failure. It is the very engine of learning.